is Rachel Eisenberg from the Association of School Psychologists of Pennsylvania. I'm very excited to be here today to host a conversation with the NASP School Psychologist of the Year, Pennsylvania's own Dr. Jason Pedersen. We are here with our president, Dr. Amber Sessoms, and two students from Dr. Pedersen's school psych training program at the Pennsylvania State University, Marissa DeCalabas and Juliana Boucher. Let's learn more about Dr. Pedersen. Dr. Sessoms, take it away.
Hey, y'all. So can I just say that I'm really excited because the tables have turned and I get to interview the Dr. Jason Pedersen, right? So really excited about this. I think back to my grad school days, we heard about the illustrious Dave and Jason, and the fact that he's now a colleague is such an honor. So really excited for this conversation today. So I'm going to start with, right? Tell us about what you do as a school psychologist.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for, first of all, thank you all for being here today and for taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk with me. I do really appreciate that. In terms of what I do as a school psychologist, I would say if you know what the practice model is, I do pretty close to what that is. There's a portion of my job that is assessment, as with every school psychologist, but it's a relatively small portion, especially if you're talking about individual assessment. It's probably more in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% of my time is spent doing individual assessments. I would say if you globally described assessment as being and participating in universal screening and things like that, it probably goes up to closer to 20 or so percent. Most of the time it's spent doing system level consultation with teachers, with parents, with families, working with administration on really trying to look at how we can design the system to maximally meet all the needs of all the students. So whether it's an academic in the realm of academics, behavior, social emotional learning, whatever the domain of functioning you think of, we're always trying to figure out, and I'm spending time trying to work on that, which is making the system be more efficient and raise all the boats. So yeah, working with data analysis teaming, working with looking at what our evidence-based practice is and how do you scale it up? How do you take that research and turn it into a practice as opposed to just, oh, that was an interesting article. It seemed like it had a lot of good promise. I'll never be able to do that in the schools. Well, thinking about how do you take that from an article and turn it into something you can do in the schools. So that way you really are providing the highest quality service to the students and the staff. I mean, it really makes everybody's lives easier when we make the system run more smoothly and effectively. Is it perfect all the time? No. But really try to spend as much time working in that realm as possible, and doing a lot of data analysis, period. I would almost call, I won't say full-on action research, but it's a lot of self-study, analyzing our data, our trends, what are our kids in every group doing, who's overrepresented, who's underrepresented. Is it different for academics? Is it different for behavior? Really trying to look for, the way I describe it is I try to look for the signal and the noise, to say what are the issues that we need to be focusing on and how do we find that pattern that might seem like it doesn't exist and go, this is what we should be working on. You know, we're seeing a problem in grade 6. Well, it's not a grade 6 problem. It's a 2 through 5 problem that we need to address in this area. So we need to be thinking about what the genesis of that is, so that way we can affect that change in a lasting way. So yeah, I mean, that's probably how I spend most of my time working in that regard. So I find it very engaging and very diverting. So
what I love about what you said is that about only 15 and 20% of your time is assessment, that we have two scholars in the midst, right? So when you're in your program, you learn that's the least amount of things that you do, and then you come in the field and then people don't understand our role. We get called guidance counselors, all the things. And for you to come in and say that that's the least amount of what I do, because I'm going to do the whole practice model, I think really just speaks to the breadth of what we can do in profession. And you've been one of the people to really advocate for that. So in terms of that, like you talked a little bit about the prevention and intervention, that modality of like you are looking at as being a systems level change agent. Can you talk a little bit more about what that could look like and maybe a real case example of like how you help in consultation, or maybe even like your system-wide thing? I know you talk about data with your entire school team, but what does that look like in practice?
yeah, no, that's a great question, because actually what's interesting, Amber, is that, you know, as you pointed out, most people like get us wrong. They're like, oh, school counselor, what are you assistant principal? What's your deal? What is it exactly? You're wearing a tie, or you're wearing this, you look professional. Where do you fit in? And I find that to be very empowering, because the power in that is that when they're not 100% sure what it is you're supposed to be doing, there's a lot of freedom to define what it is what you want to do and what you should be doing. So I used that very early on in my career. I was leveraged that to say, yeah, this is the part I have to do. Yes, we are involved in the special education evaluation process, gifted, all that, 100%. However, that doesn't have to dominate my career or dominate my job. So that's what I'm supposed to do. But look, here are all the other things I can do. Like one of the things I did every job I ever took, or every time a new principal was hired, is I scheduled a meeting with them in August before things got crazy. And I sat down and said, hey, by the way, hi, I'm Jason. Nice to meet you. Welcome aboard. As a school psychologist, there's a lot that I can do to help you actualize your vision. So what is it you want to see as the school's goals, and how do you want to achieve that? And what do you want to really accomplish in this? Because, if all you do is use me for assessment all the time, and that's where you pigeonhole me or see me as functioning, then you're wasting a lot of opportunity here. I'm the Spock to your Captain Kirk. I can help you really figure out how to do this stuff. It's like if you had now I didn't use this example then, but I could use it now. It's like if you have a smartphone, nobody just uses their smartphone to make telephone calls. You use it there are a million apps on that. That's us as school psychologists. We are the smartphone of education, as we have a million apps that we can do. So rather than just say, hey, I'm going to have you make phone calls all the time, i.e. special education or gifted evals, look, no, there is an app for data analysis. Here's an app for intervention planning. Nobody's bothering to check. The example I often use is nobody bothers to check to see whether what they do works or not in education for the most part. They just do it and they go, oh, that feels good, right? Yes, it feels good. Well done us. And then they don't bother to see if it, and then a couple of years down the road, that's when they find out whether it works or not. So I've always been like, well, let's try to find those things. Like I remember early on, one of the things I did was I researched core reading programs because our reading outcomes were terrible. At least in my mind, they were terrible. I'm very malcontent. There were about 65% of our students were advanced proficient on the PSSAs. And we can do way better than that. I wouldn't send my child to a school that was 65% effective. So we can do better than this. How do we fight this functional illiteracy that our system is creating? Let's do better. So I started researching core reading programs. I was school psychologist. At Penn State, we had to take reading courses and reading instruction, how to teach reading and all that, but it wasn't comprehensive or in depth. It was more like a smattering of it to give you a taste of it. Well, then I took it upon myself to learn about the teaching of reading, and then research what you need to be able to do that, and what our programs are effective, and how you can rate a core program based on its balance of instruction and numbers of opportunities to respond and all those instructional variables and things like that, the amount of time devoted to different content you need to be teaching. So I learned about that. And then rather than be the person who just says, hey, there's a problem, let's admire the problem, I always say, if there's a problem, you need to come with a solution. So I came with a solution saying our core program isn't working. By the way, here's a new core program we could look at, and here are some interventions we can try. And by the way, here's how we can assess it efficiently and effectively to see whether it works or not. So that I would, show up in principal's office and central office administrator's office. I'd schedule meetings and say, hey, by the way, let's try this. Here's the research behind it. If you're going to spend your money, this is probably a good way to spend it. It has a high likelihood of being successful. So why not? Let's do that, right? You can be the face of that. And I don't have to be the face of it. I can be the person behind the scenes. But yeah, you can be the one to get all the glory, well, as much glory as you get in education. So yeah. I don't know if that was specific enough. I could be probably a touch more specific if you want. But...
No, I love that, because you're speaking to and modeling this idea of leadership coaching. And I find that it's such a need within the field of education, right? I find that there's a lot of people that are managers. I've asked superintendents, I've asked leaders, what's your vision? And they'll say, I don't have a vision. I just manage the day-to-day functions of the building. I'm like, well, that's problematic. But what you're doing is working alongside them, helping them build the capacity to do the work that needs to be done. And that whole idea of leading from the middle, I don't need the glory because I know the intent, I know the impact it's going to make. I need you to do the work that needs to be done, and I can support you in that. And that you start off and saying, hey, I'm Jason, nice to meet you, right? And I can help you. Building that partnership, I think, is really key. So a lot of what you're saying really speaks to, we have to be, have our own agency and have to really, advocate for ourselves and our roles. So I just think you've always been a really good model of that. So I just really appreciate that. So hope you all taking notes, because I'm over here taking notes. And so with that, and maybe, expounding, or just if you want to add anything to the best part, all right, of being a school psychologist, you've kind of touched on a little bit that, but anything else you want to add, what is the best part for you?
I always jokingly say it's the travel. No, I'm just kidding. Or the glory, right? No. The best part for me, it's a combination of things. I'll be honest, I love working with our interns and practicum students. I really do. Because I always view that as being a two-way street, is that I find that experience of working with interns and prac students probably is the best thing that's ever happened to me, because it keeps me sharp. Because I have to be on top of my game, because there's someone spending a lot of time with me, like listening to what I'm saying and trying to become a professional and do this and go out on their own. And so I better be doing right by them, or it's a multiplicative effect. If I do it badly, then it's like, how many schools and kids do I screw up by not having this person be well trained? So it helps to keep me sharp. So I love that. And I also love when we work through the system and that struggle, and it's often a struggle to get a system to change. Make no mistake, it's not for the faint of heart. So really working through that process to get that system right, I really enjoy that tussle. I mean, I grew up in southwestern PA, so I enjoy a good tussle and fight. That's how we roll. But it's always that. So I always joke that I'm really good at it being sort of the wartime person and not so much the peacetime person, because I enjoy the struggle. And then afterwards, I really enjoy handing that off to someone else to say, you can manage it. My strength was seeing where we needed to go, helping us to get there, pushing the system, nudging it along, being the crank in the back of the room that was constantly saying, yeah, we can do better. We need to be doing this. We need to be doing this. And then once it's up and running, distributing that to say, okay, you now can own this. So distributing so everybody owns a piece of it. So it's no longer contingent on me and my persistence and tenacity. It's everybody owns it. And then I can step back and go, wow, that really works well. So I think of like our MTSS system for reading and for math and behavior. It runs like a well-oiled machine. And back in the day, Dave, as you mentioned, my colleague Dave Lowenstein and I, yeah, it was a fight. But it runs very, very smoothly now. And it's just tweaking, refining, and making it better at this point is what we've kind of gotten to. And that's really gratifying to see, because you're like, yeah, that's pretty slick. So yeah, that's probably it.
No, I love the idea of shared ownership. And you talked about MTSS. And I'm wondering, because you were one of the first, right? Thinking about moving from ineligibility for special, specific learning disability and moving to that RTI model. And thinking about changing that system, how does that work? Because you're talking about shared ownership. It can't just be on me. It has to be everyone on the team. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So actually that started back, I will give, it was funny. It was Joe Kovaleski back in 2002-ish, around 2001, 2002. And I remember because my daughter was born in 2002. So I was working at the IU13 with Lebanon County programs, special ed programs there, and at the elementary level. And Joe was the special ed director for Cornwall Lebanon School District. So and he's a Penn State alum. Look at that, full circle here. And so we spent a lot of time. In different meetings and things like that for supporting all the different kids. And then that spring, he said, "Hey, we're gonna have a position open in our district. Do you think you might want to take that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because as much I loved working for the IU, but it was only with the special education population. So while I did a lot of great work there and the people were fabulous and it was really gratifying, I wanted to be more prevention oriented. And that was you can't be prevention oriented on that end. The kids are already identified, that's already taken place. So he said, yeah, we're gonna have this. So I thought this would be great to be able to work in a school system before the kids get identified. That would be a really great opportunity. And he said, oh, and by the way, you might want to go to Patton. There's a training with Roland Good on Dibbles. Maybe you want to check it out. So I went to it and I was like, this is amazing, and I was so really from there it started with great, if we have assessments, we can know who's at risk, then we start using good interventions to figure out how we can support them. And we'll be able to be more efficient. We'll know whether our curriculum is working, we'll know whether our core programs are working, all this stuff, all these great ideas. And the principal and I, we talked about this all summer long, and we're all on board. And I rush in to see the language arts coordinator, and she's like, no. And I was like, what? I was all like so eager. And I'm like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to take the world by storm. And she said, no, we have, and there was very much a whole language district, and they had reading recovery as their interventions, and had these crappy assessments that they used that were terrible. And they changed them every year, the number of items, like from 10 to 17 to 15 to 20 every year. And so she was not on board with any of that. And I don't recommend saying what I said, which was we were talking about the assessments. And I said, we have these assessments that are brief, valid, highly reliable, and very predictive of performance. We should be doing these instead of these other assessments. She's like, no, we have assessments. I'm like, your assessments are garbage. And I actually said that out loud, which that would be, here's your tip, friends. That's a think it, don't say it moment, because that did not endear me to her at all. But I was very passionate about it. And so, yeah, I kind of said it. And she said, well, you're not getting a dime from this office. And I said, well, do you care if we do it? And her response was, if you want to waste your time, go ahead. And I'm like, great. And I'm like, that's not a no. So and this is where you have to have a little bit of sweat equity. It's one of the things we learned at Penn State is to be generally useful, right? And so I literally collected the fall benchmark pretty much by myself, which took till November. Simply so we had the data to be able to use to have the conversation and talk about this and move the needle and start having these discussions. And that slowly evolved into, then I got a team for the winter benchmark. And so what took 4 months now took about a week and a half. And then we started having data meetings and we started looking at the schedule. And we started putting interventions because we couldn't change the core program, but I had a small budget, which was weird. I'm like, what? I had $400. I'm like, score. So I bought interventions that I gave to the teachers. And I said, here, I'm not buying stuff for me. They give me assessments and all these things. You guys need interventions that they don't budget for. So I bought interventions for our teachers and we made recommendations. We tried to use them. I worked with our reading specialists who were doing reading recovery. I said, hey, can I convince you to do a small group intervention in addition to doing reading recovery, so that way we can really see what the difference is in performance and outcomes for the 6 kids you work with in a day versus the potential of like 30, up to 30 some kids you could work with in a day. And she thankfully agreed. It was all about talking to her and reasoning with her and getting her to buy in. And so got her to buy in. And we actually did a little action research where we compared the outcomes for the kids who were getting the one-on-one instruction to the small group, and found that the small group outperformed them 3-to-1 in the same interval. We're like, why are you spending money? You could be working with many more kids. So start doing a cost benefit analysis with the administration about, this is more cost effective for you. This works better for children. Everything about this is better. And then work through that process to get more and more interventions online. And then got to the point where we got them to change the core program. When I mentioned earlier about finding one, I'd recommended one, and we did this whole curriculum review process and program review process. Because I'm sending the administrators histograms about our performance all the time and analyzing the benchmark assessments relative to the PSSAs. And this was in the time of No Child Left Behind, when everybody was like not wanting to be in the newspaper, how old am I? Newspaper, for being the school district that was failing and all this stuff. So they were motivated to do something different. And I said, here's a solution. So we got the change going, and within a year or two, we actually predated the whole review process for SLD determination that they did for MTSS now, for RTI. We started using RTI for SLD determination back in, like 2004-ish. Yeah, and actually I'll give a shout out to Jim DePerna, because one of the articles that really helped this whole process, it had a really sexy title, was a 3-tiered model to prevent reading failure. And that's what we said, well, that makes great sense. Let's do that. So we set up that whole process. It was RTI as a concept MTSS was nowhere on the radar, and response to intervention as a concept was just coming into fruition of like, oh, this is something we can do. This is a way we can do that. And that's how we started identifying kids for SLD back then. And then I think by, what was it, 2008-ish is when they actually came out with a review process. And we were between Derry Township, where I work now, and Cornwall Lebanon School District, where I worked then. Oh, it was no predated. It was like 2006-07 is when they actually did it. We were like 1-2 in terms of being the first 2 schools to be approved by the state to use RTI for SLD determination, because we had built the infrastructure. Dave did it in Derry, and Jen Lillenstein, but now Jen Collins and I worked together at Cornwall Lebanon, and we put that in place there.
So do y'all understand why he is our NASP School Psychologist of the Year, right? And why that when I was in my grad classes in like 2006, I'm hearing about this man. I'm like, who is this man? So with that, right, like, what does it mean to you to be the NASP School Psychologist of the Year? What does that mean? Like, that's, whew.
Yeah, it's extremely humbling, because honestly, my wife she was trained as a school psychologist as well. And she works as an administrator at Milton Hershey School. And kind of, people think I'm joking, but I'm really not when I say it, but I'm not even the best school psychologist in my house. So it's really hard for me to think that that this was that people thought well of me enough to give me this honor. But it is humbling because I think that I'm the work in progress for sure, and that that it's humbling. It's gratifying because it has been it's been a struggle over the years to get things and having the same conversations, same fights, but new people to try to get the system working the way it needs to be it's been a struggle, but it's enormously gratifying, but it's also very humbling because I'll talk to other school psychologists, and I've been involved in leadership for a while now, and I talk to different school psychs around the country, and I think, God, what am I doing with my time? This person's amazing. I just feel like I'm slacking. I got to step up my game here because God, look what they're doing. So I'm always interested in hearing what other people are doing because I learn so much all the time from hearing from people. So I find this to be, it's a really neat honor. It really is. But it is also very humbling at the same time because, I grew up in Jeanette, that's what am I? I'm just a kid from Jeanette. Milltown. That was, how did this happen to me? So yeah. Anyway, that's yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it to Marissa because I want to come back and ask you a question at the end.
Okay.
So, Dr. Pedersen, I guess what I'm wondering as a graduate student is how your work has been influenced by your own graduate training.
Great question. You can call me Jason, by the way, Marissa.
All right, Jason,
I'm very informal. It's all right. You can call me Jason. Yeah, I give all credit to Penn State for really for the school psych that I am, and it does break my heart that the program is sunsetting. But it was life-changing. It really was. The education that I got there was phenomenal. The professors were amazing. I mean, the professor in charge was Marley Watkins, and I think he's now retired. But I mean, he talked about data focused. I mean, we were looking at articles on actuarial decision making and education back in the mid 90s. And so it was like, wow, and it made sense to me. It really clicked. I'm like, this makes sense. How can you use your data to make better decisions and be more consistent and precise and do the best for children? And that was amazing. And Frank Worrell was is he still? Yeah, I think no, he's past president now of APA. He was there when I was there. He was one of the professors. Actually, he and I co-authored an article that was my master's equivalency. And it was just amazing. I mean, his breadth of knowledge and just everything, and he was so dynamic. It was just very, very engaging. And all the adjunct faculty. When Dr. French was still there, he interviewed me. My first interview for grad school was Dr. French. And as ironically enough, because my major professor wasn't able to make graduation when I got hooded, which I didn't know till I got to the ceremony. Dr. French happened to be there for a couple of other people. So I kind of sheepishly went over and asked him if he would hood me, if he wouldn't mind. So I felt very full circle there that he interviewed me the first, and he was the one who put the hood on me to leave. So it was really, it was gratifying. And then all of the people that I met, all of the colleagues, and people that were in my cohort, are still some of my closest friends. Tim Runge at IUP was one of my roommates in grad school. Julia Zarco was a year, 2 years ahead of us, and we're all like, wow. Well, Julia's really cool. She knows all about autism. I remember our first year, we're like, we don't know anything. We're just kind of stupid here. And it's like, wow, these people know this stuff. It was a test librarian and Jeremy Pedersen, who works for Montgomery County, and Lisa Allison, who's director of school psych services for Charleston Public Schools. I mean, all these people, there's so many. I know there are many people I'm not even mentioning that were really, it was very fascinating. I mean, there was just really a lot of great minds that were there and very helpful. And frankly, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to have on the hallways, they had the covers of books and research, et cetera, from all the alumni from Penn State, like posted on the walls. So, and literally the room we hung out in was called 111, which was this little shoebox of a room with these massive computers that were barely functional. That we had to like schedule time to use. But outside that, you walked out the door and you're looking at all of these like publications by Roland Good, this person, that person, all these different people, everything is Steve Bagnata, just the walls covered with it. And you're like, I just want to finish. can I get done? But it was, it was all of that. And in fact, one time I remember we were in the building where the creamery is. They had this little auditorium there for a class, and they'd invited Joe Kowaleski to come back to speak. And so he did this whole thing because he was doing IST statewide in Pennsylvania. He was rolling it out to the entire state, Commonwealth PA. And they come in and he just describes the whole process to it, and we're all like, oh my God, wow, that's amazing. And then at the end, after he leaves, Marty Watkins looks at us all and goes, Penn State turns out leaders in school psychology. That's what we expect from all of you. And we're like, I just want to get through my next class, So but it stuck with us, because that was the message we heard all the time, is if you go to Penn State, the expectation is that you'll be a leader in the field. That's our expectation for you. And wherever that takes you, whether it's within your building, your district, the state, the national, we expect you to do work that is leading the field. So that was kind of what we got. So that was pretty huge for me. And that was the crucible in which this was all formed. So
I love that. And I think it echoes a lot of what we still experience here at Penn State. I think Juliana has another one for you.
Yeah, I was going to say I would speak for Marissa and myself in saying how important this program has been for our growth and our mutual excitement to support kids. And we are also deeply saddened about the program sunsetting, but very grateful for the training and have very similar experiences as you. So selfishly, as Marissa and I are first year school psychologists now coming out, I'm applying for jobs and internships, reflecting on your illustrious career and all of the things you've done, I was wondering, what is a challenge that you faced in your first year of working, and how did you overcome it?
Wow. I say, actually, it was funny because my internship, I can't believe I forgot to mention, my internship was at Mifflin County School District, and my supervisor was Dr. Shirley Weka. Fast talking Shirley. So it was something else, because talk about having to be on your, if you haven't met Shirley, you have to be on your game. You can't just sort of like fake it, because she'll be like, what, I'm sorry, what? She'll call you out on it. So you have to really be in there. You have to kind of know what you're doing. But I just remember, talk about imposter syndrome. I just remember internship and my first job. I just was like, I'm sorry, you're looking to me to do what exactly? Oh, this is my decision now. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm the one leading this team meeting. Oh, wonderful. It was definitely a challenge. I would say for me, probably the biggest challenge right out of the gate, it was just feeling comfortable. And I'm sure I think it's probably something everybody experiences, but it was really feeling comfortable with you're the one who's making the recommendation. The team is looking to you to do that. It is a team decision, but ultimately on some level, they're still looking to you to be sort of saying, yes, the child definitely meets the criterion or not. This is kind of that goes. But I remember early on having to talk to a family of a child who was 5, was a kindergartner, about their child being a student with an intellectual disability. And that was pretty early in that time for me, like literally like the fall of my internship. And it was just having to think about so much about what are you going to say to a family that is honest, accurate, and gives them hope and understanding that this is not an end to the story. This is just the beginning to a story. And I wish I could have said that I thought it that articulately at the time, but that's kind of what I did go through, which was because I could see as I'm sharing with them the results and sharing with the child that has an intellectual disability, the mom starts to cry. And instinctively, I just pivoted to what we were going to do. And I wish I could say it was because I really was thoughtful and planned that out at the time. It was just, I'm like, we can't end on this. So I was like, no. So, but here's what we're going to do to help your child. This is what we're going to do programmatically. This is what it's going to mean. This is how we're going to support them. This is what this is what it's going to mean. And so, yes, this is what it's, and I just remember trying to be very affirming and positive about that. We had a plan and this wasn't it. And it was, and I wish I could say it was 100%, it was as much to soothe me and make me feel better in the moment as it was for the mom, which was, I needed her to know that this is what we're going to do. And I also needed to I need to say it out loud because then it was more real to me. So it's that challenge because we all feel right out of the gate like imposters, like, what do I know? But it was definitely a challenge. And the other challenge, irony of ironies, is curriculum-based measurement. I was not, we had a class on it, but it was not emphasized as much. And so at the time, I remember interviewing for an internship, and they were asking questions about curriculum-based measurement, and I kind of faked my way through it and deservedly did not get the internship because they were right. I mean, I was like, I'll do this and that. And they're like, come on. And I was like, shoot. After I didn't get that gig, I definitely, no, it wasn't an internship. It was the first job. No, it was an internship. Anyway, so I remember well, now I need to read up on this because I felt like an idiot in the room. And the irony of that is that curriculum-based measurement dominates my life for the last 25 years. But at the time I was like, I don't know that much. So yeah. So there's a lot of that right out of the gate, is that you're going to have these holes that you're totally blind and unaware of until the first time it comes up and you're like, oh. The nice thing now is we're much more interconnected, so you can phone a friend and be like, hey, help me. What is this? I feel like I should know this, but clearly don't. And that's the other thing, is you have to be being humble about it and saying, I don't know is a good thing. I mean, it's okay, because it's worse to pretend and get it wrong than to say, I really don't know. I will have to look into that, and being able to swallow that pride a little bit and be like, yeah, I don't know. And because other people have expertise you can take advantage of, and you should. I give really long answers. I apologize. If you want to cut me off or give me the hook, you can.
I think you're doing great.
Thanks.
I would say, I was next going to ask a little bit about, we know that you devote a lot of your time to supporting and training interns and school psych students and early career school psychologists. And so you gave some advice in that last answer, which I'm definitely going to be keeping with me. Is there anything that you would give specifically for students or early career school psychologists as like a top piece of advice to bring with us?
Yeah, I would say this is usually it's within the context of an evaluation, because it's helpful for folks, because that's a very structured process. By the time you've completed that evaluation, there's probably not anybody else in the world who knows more about that kid in that case in that moment than you. And there's power in that, in remembering that, and being okay and saying, yeah, the parents, they know their child. I mean, I'm not diminishing what parents and what they know about their kids, but you have all of this information from the school environment and school place that is different from their experience and knowledge of their child. So you're coming in there. So you have to you walk in there, and it's not easy to do, because when you walk in, you're going to feel uncomfortable as you're facilitating a meeting, just because it's early and you're doing that. But just remember that, is that in that moment, you know more about that child than probably anybody else. And remember, you're telling the story of that child in this process. So there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's a story arc here to get to the end of all of that. And that's how you need to conceptualize it. So I always tell people, think about what you're going to say to start. How do you open the meeting? We're going to say something like, well, we're here to discuss the results of this evaluation. To do this evaluation, it's a two-pronged process. You have to be eligible for disability and demonstrating a need. So as we talk today, we're going to be talking about all the data we've collected to answer those two very basic questions. And then you start in, we got information from you, we got information from the team. So it should be a conversation, not a litany of scores. It's a discussion that you're having with the child, and you're telling the story of this whole process. And at the end, you're saying, and the story ends with, your child qualified or your child didn't qualify. And if they did qualify, this is what we're doing. And if they didn't qualify, this is the information we gathered that's going to help us support your child, even though they didn't qualify for special education. So it's really conceptualizing that as a story that you're telling of this child in that moment. And if you do that, it becomes more of a conversation you're having with the family, because it's a process you want to do with them, not to them. So it's really about that discussion and really having that back and forth and listening in that meeting, which is really hard to do, especially early on. Because early on, you're like, I would like to tell you about this thing and this score, and you're just freaking out. So you're not really tuning in. You're just trying to do your speech. But if you actually stop and then listen, because then you can hear and then you can pivot. A parent will say, well, yeah, they ask you a question and you're like, well, next on my list was a cover X, and that's not till here. Well, it's okay, pivot to that. talk about that, and then bring it back around to have that conversation and say, well, that's a very interesting question. Let's talk about how that relates to what we're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And you weave it in. So then it becomes a part of the conversation, answers their question, and makes them really feel valued and a part of the whole process. So those are some just tips from a friendly neighborhood school psychologist. So.
Awesome. Yeah. So outside of evaluations, taking a bit of a pivot, earlier in the conversation, Amber had asked you a question and you had shared about your experience with speaking with like leadership about what your role is and how you can help them and create their vision in a way outside of just the traditional test and place model. So I wanted to kind of get you to expand on that, give us a little bit more information about what are the best ways to kind of approach those conversations, especially for folks that are feeling very overburdened in the test and replace model in their districts.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, and I will say this, is that we're probably the most highly trained people in the schools. So don't forget that. And there's power in that. And do not forget that. Remember that. You guys are all amazing. There's everybody, whether you're specialist level, doctor level, doesn't matter. At the specialist level is amazing training. Embrace that and recognize that. And I say that not to be arrogant and be like, screw you, I'm the best person around. It's because there's power. You need to be comfortable in your own skin and say, yeah, I have these skills. And if you're waiting for someone to recognize your brilliance, you're going to be waiting a long time. Nobody's sitting around going, you know what? Who should we ask about this? We should ask the school psychologist. Where are they? To the school psychologist phone. That's not happening. You have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. And frankly, administrators they're people just like you. So it's okay to speak to them and to speak truth to them. And to be okay to have these conversations and be unafraid to do that, is to say, look, I think, and I would say, don't go in with a problem only. Come in with a problem and a solution. So every problem is an opportunity if you look at it the right way. So if all of a sudden there are a million, I hate whack-a-mole. No, at least I love playing whack-a-mole. I hate it in my job. Whack-a-mole is a lot of fun to play at the amusement park, not a lot of fun in your practice. So if you find that you're always like putting out fires, or not just you, but your district is always just putting out fires or responding to the tyranny of the immediate, something's happening, so now we have to respond to this, we have to respond to that, you'll never get off your heels. You never get off your heels. So you do have to be able to multitask a little bit, in that you have to say, I still have to do this thing, which is mildly reactive, but I want to talk to you about how we can stop this reaction from being our typical way of operating. Here's my idea. Here's the data that shows what it looks like, where it came from. Here's the scope, the nature of it. And I think these solutions will work. And this is what it would cost to do that. But this is what would save us in terms of cost. The administrators' love language is finances. Let's be honest. I mean, it is, and it's not a criticism, but it is. There, to your point earlier, I think Amber said it, that there's some management that's involved with running schools, and you have to be responsible for a budget. I 100% agree. But you can help them to use those funds, those finite funds that they have, more effectively and efficiently if you spend the time going, hey, this is what's been happening. I just need a little bit of your time. And if we can change this thing just a little bit, then that'll make your life easier, my life easier, everybody's life easier, and it doesn't cost us as much. Because having lots of kids suspended or ending up in special education or any of those services, those are very pricey things to do for a school. That costs you a lot of money, both in terms of financial that you have to pay for and all the salaries, the time that is wasted, et cetera. You lose money there. Whereas if you're more prevention oriented, you can save money. It's harder for people to see that. So you have to help them in small doses. So you might not walk in on day one and go, well, Superintendent so-and-so, tomorrow we will begin MTSS and it will be wonderful and you'll love it. It's probably not going to happen like that. So you find your coalition of the willing. Who are the people? So maybe you say, my principal is open to this, because you've had a chance to talk to them and you help them convince them. You help them say, this is what we can do together. And you work together because they can be your allies, and they should be. You should be looking for allies. And also finding who has the power that's not on the org chart. So it might also be that you have to say, well, this is the org chart power, but this teacher over here and this teacher over here, they're the ones with the real power in the building as well. So how do I get them pulled in too? But it's working multiple, it's a bit of a sales job, to be honest with you. You're having to do a sales pitch. Who do I have to sell this to? I have to sell it to administration, I have to sell it to some of the teachers, but really helping the administration to see if we do this, it will save us in the long run and be more efficient, more effective. So the metric we used to use when I was at Cornell Lebanon was what is the most achievement we can get per child for the least amount of time spent? And it was just a totally arbitrary formula that we kind of came up with. But it was like, if we think about, if I can do an intervention in 20 minutes that gets me this much growth, as opposed to 30 minutes, which gets me this growth, I'm going to do the 20-minute one that does this. It's just more cost effective. So it's really trying to work that language and organize your thoughts in a way to help with that pitch. So coming in with both, these are the problems, I've looked at it at different angles, this is how we're approaching it currently. This is a way where we can gain efficiencies by doing this intervention, this assessment, changing our instruction in this way. These are the things that make it work better and be more efficient and effective. So it works for you. Then you'll be hailed as a hero because you were able to save the district money and be more effective. It's a win-win. And then recognizing that it's okay to go then to central office and say, hey, by the way, I was talking to and talk to the principal first. Say, hey, do you mind if I pick this up a little bit and try talking to the next person? Because you don't want to undercut anybody or feel like you're going over their head. But it's okay to loop them into to say, hey, just so you know, we've been talking about this. And we've been thinking about doing this. What do you think? Director of elementary ed or director of secondary ed or director of however the structure is there, curriculum and instruction. Hey, I wanted to pull you into this conversation we're having because it's a really great resource that we found that, we could really do this with kids. What do you think? You want to take a look at it? Can I share it with you? And come and don't be like, oh, I'll schedule it. Come ready to share. Show up for the meeting that you scheduled with all of your stuff ready to go. And yeah, that's it's really making sure that you're being coherent and you're thinking about it and having a direction and you have just to be tenacious. Tenacity might be your best skill set, frankly, is not letting go of it. How do I keep on keeping on? So
I mean, if you're nothing but tenacious, right? Thinking about that. And some of the things that you said, like thinking about that we need to be more proactive than reactive and thinking about, again, like Rachel and I were having this, I think we were texting and having a discussion about NERN, National Implementation Research Network. And what you're talking about really describes, I'm picturing the triangle as you're talking about it and thinking about how you have your implementation teams that you're building and also the drivers that you're doing. And that because we see the entire system, that we're strategists like that you can help to build that, I think is so powerful. So just thank you for articulating that, because I can see that you've laid that out very nicely for us. And it's just an inspiration for how we need to do more of that systems level work and the benefit that it helps everyone and makes a huge impact on actual lives of actual students, right? So in thinking about that, like you're one of the people, when you said hero earlier, I was like, well, I mean, he's one of the heroes, right? Because you're one of the inaugural recipients of how many do we have in PA? You'll get to that. But thinking about the Excellence in School Psychological Services Award, how many are there in Pennsylvania? Oh, who might that be?
That'd be Derry Township School District, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a really great process. So it's a program that NASP created a few years ago, the Excellence in School Psychological Services recognition, and you pay a nominal fee as a district to get the materials, and it's a whole series of self-reflection that you go through. And looking at your practices and what you're doing and how you're implementing and how you're documenting and everything, every corner and every nook and cranny of your practice is covered in this. And so we decided, let's go for it. So we paid the nominal fee, and started working through it, and had to gather all of the evidence with our administration, building and central office, teachers, et cetera, us, getting it all organized to submit. And it was very eye-opening because we do lots of things. I think we do lots of things pretty well. And then there were spots where we went through this process and go, gosh, that never even dawned on. We should be thinking about that. We should be doing that. So it was really helpful. Even if you're not ready to submit the application to be considered, I definitely recommend, I think it's like $100 fee, getting your district to pay $100 to get the materials, to then actually look through the rubrics, to look at your practice and say, oh, wow, this is an opportunity here. This is a place where we could grow. This is a place where we could expand. This is a practice we could be engaging in. So it was very helpful because it takes everybody to complete it. And we had to gather information from everybody under the sun in the district to do this. So it wasn't just us sitting in a room going, let's put this all together. It was everybody, it was a group process. And then we submitted it. We're like, all right, well, here goes nothing. Who knows? We don't know how it's going to come back. So yeah, it was a really great honor that when we were recognized as being a proficient district in terms of school psych services. There's only one above us, and I think at the time there was only one district that had gotten the advanced. I think it was advanced is what the category is, and they were and I looked at their stuff and like, yeah, they are advanced. They're great. They're phenomenal. Yeah, we got to step up our game here. But it was really gratifying to do, and it's a very good process. And actually, I would say should be used as an advocacy tool. If you can convince your district to give you the $100 or your special ed director to give you the $100 to start the process, get all the materials and the rubrics and go through it and say, wow, look what we could be doing. Look at how we could be conceptualizing our services. It's not just simply test and place. It's not reactionary. It's not just you beating me down by giving me referral after referral after referral after referral to the point where I can't even see straight. I can be doing different things. I mean, that's an important part of my job. But if we think about and conceptualize these service delivery systems differently, we might be able to reduce the overall number of evaluations, but increase our accuracy of correctly identifying students. And if you figure, what's your hit rate when you're doing 120 evals during a year? Are all those kids qualifying? I'd be willing to bet the case is probably not. So have you stepped back to say, well, yeah, we're doing 120 evals in a given year, and about 60 of them qualify. Are truly so okay. You wasted time with 60 other evals. If your system were designed differently, could it have made a difference there that you were thinking, reconceptualizing those services so that way that time is better spent where you're being more proactive, you're providing services to students that are more direct. And yeah, you still have time and you have time to do the 60 that actually are more likely to qualify because your systems are supporting that process. So it's a great opportunity to advocate for your services. So I highly recommend finding the bread to be able to do it and just check it out. And even if you don't want to submit, you might say, nope, we're not ready to submit, but it gives you the chance to really reflect and perhaps revise your services and enhance them.
I mean, that personal reflection and looking at the team level reflection, I think is so key, that we are lifelong learners, and you're definitely modeling that. And I think about when you go through that process, what came up for you as an individual in your profession, being like, oh, well, here's one of the things that I'm so proud of myself about, dusting your shoulders, I'll pat myself on the back as you went through that reflective process. Is there anything that really stood out to you, like, man, put this on my tombstone? I don't know, maybe but maybe.
Wow. It's a very interesting way of putting it. I would say for me, and if you know me, it probably won't come as a great surprise. It was to see how smoothly and effectively our data analysis teams work. Because if you think about there's so many pieces to the engine of MTSS, but that's one of the most critical. I mean, you can't run it without all of the others, the universal screening, instruction, et cetera. But that team where you actually sit down and you're having those decisions being made about who's going to what tier, what makes sense, what are the interventions you're going to be looking at, et cetera, as you're working that was very gratifying to see, because it was one of the things we set up and now had it just functioning pretty well. And that was really just very neat to see, because it was, and especially because I know from anecdotally from the meetings, it's no longer where our data analysis team meetings for probably my first couple of years at Derry Township were, well, this kid's sibling or parent or blah, 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 fill in the unalterable variable that we can't do anything about. And that's what we're going to complain about for the entire meeting about this kid, to the point where teachers were walking in and going, when I think about this child's phonemic awareness, I have concerns about this. So just watching that shift and recognizing that happened was extraordinarily gratifying to see. And that was one of the neat things when we actually sat back and reflected doing that process. We're like, oh yeah, we really nailed that, didn't we? Yeah. For me in particular, I love that part.
I love that you love that. And if anyone can tell, you're really excited about the field, right? And I love the excitement. I won't say, how long you been doing this, 25 years?
Yeah.
Got a little ways to go, maybe.
Yeah.
And thinking about I always think about what makes you come alive. I think about this field, it's so beautiful when your personal values align with the profession. So for you in this moment, as you're moving forward and thinking about what's next for you, what's really making you come alive and think about what I'm going to be working on and what do I want to work on? What are the aspirations that you have?
Wow. Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. I've mentioned the word malcontent once or twice, I think, today, and I know I've said it before, is that I actually am a bit of a malcontent, is I always think we can do better. So I'm always looking for, where do we go? How do we do this better? So the last couple of years, a lot of my efforts at the system level have been in the area of social emotional learning and training staff, district-wide staff, the district-wide, and getting those processes in place. And so we worked on our SEL coach and a school social worker and I were sort of the genesis of it in terms of getting that organized and doing district level teaming, or creating district level professional development. And thankfully, I mean, give all credit to our administration, because they committed 5 years to where we're going to be working on SEL for 5 years. It's one of the district level goals, and they put the resources and gave us some trainings, and we worked with a group to develop our skills, and gave us really the autonomy to create the arc of training for our staff. And we spent a lot of time early on not focusing on what we're going to do with kids, but what we're doing as with our own SEL as adults. What are our own skills like? So we spent our first probably year and a half of the training, which is 14 hours each year. So it's 28 hours, it's almost 28 hours that we spent focusing on just developing self-awareness, social awareness, really working on us as adults. So that way we were in a better place as a staff. And now, mind you, this is coming out of COVID. We were in a better place as a staff to be able to support the students. And now in this past 6 months and moving into next year, we have spent our focus has shifted to really, how do we get teachers to embed all of this into their instruction? So we do trainings with them and then give them and do work time with them to actually give them the opportunity to embed this in what they do every day. So that way it's not an add-on, this is how we do our business. So we'll be creating morning meetings at the elementary level, midday meetings at the middle school level, a community period at the high school level. And it's not just me, there is a whole team of us, and just being able to work together to do that has been very gratifying. And it's been huge, and it's been because we recognized I used COVID as an opportunity when we shut down in the spring of 2020, after we got all the main things we had to get done wrapped up. I said, all right, how do we plan for the first question I asked? I reached out to our SEL coach, which was, how do we plan to bring everybody back in September? Because we've all we're shutting down for 3 months. And we're basically experiencing this collective trauma. What are we doing when these kids walk back in September? You know, it's hopefully we're coming back in September. I mean, are we just going to show up and pretend like nothing happened? And so we met and we got together and created a plan and pitched it to the administration to say, no, we're going to have all of our teachers, we're going to train our teachers in the summer. And then in September, for the first, when we came back, the first 10 days of school, everybody's going to be delivering the same lessons, K through 12, on dealing with trauma and dealing with your emotions. And that's what we did, K through 12. Rolled it out to the staff, got them all trained, developed the lessons for them, gave them to them. The time was dedicated. We basically ran on like a 2-hour late start schedule, but those 2 hours were dedicated to working on this. And that was our plan. And our administration was very supportive, and I give them all credit for that. And we were able to do that. And that kind of got the ball rolling. So that's been wonderful. I've been doing a lot of, and I'm excited for the work we're doing that I've been doing in regards to equity and disproportionality, and looking at how do we truly make sure that everybody is getting the best possible educational experience, and really thinking about that and saying, you know, we have to be reflective. We have to look at what we're doing or not doing, and who's represented in groups and who's not represented in groups, who's over and under, and really having those conversations. And they're not always easy. I remember the first time we showed the staff the graphs, the calculations regarding our discipline practices and the fact that they were disproportionate. People were not happy, and were very defensive. And you got to be as cool as the other side of the pillow, man, when they're coming at you. So I was just like, well, this is this is just the data. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but this is the reality of the situation. And now we're aware of it. So we have the obligation to do better. Now that we know this is happening, these patterns are happening, we need to think about how we interrupt those. And it's not interrupting them just for the sake of interrupting them because it's a nice thing to do or a good thing to do. It's because these are children and those are their lives. And we want them to have the best possible opportunity to do their best learning. We turn out global citizens. We want to have the best citizens we can. So let's make this educational experience work for everyone. And so we have to rethink and be open to do that with our students and our practices and being open to that. And the staff has been responsive to that. So even through the SEO work, it's been helpful because it's giving people the chance to really rethink how they're approaching their students and how they're engaging them, and making them feel like this is their place, they belong here. And that's something we've really been emphasizing is this is your school, you belong here. So we surveyed students, we surveyed staff, and trying to get a sense of that, and said to staff, like, look, we have portions of our populations who say they don't feel like this is their place. How do we change that narrative? We want them to feel like this is the place they should be, and that this is the place they want to be. So yeah, so that's very exciting for me. And I mean, that's kind of, I look next to, and I'm always thinking, if we can I'd love to be able to crack the code on a couple of these things and really just kind of make the situation better. And then, because I'm always like, how do you scale it up? It's one thing to do it in a small setting, but it's how do you do it where you can pick this up and take it anywhere? And that's the trick to me, is I'd like to be able to help us to come up with a process where you can say, this is scalable. You can take this and put it anywhere. So anyway.
So Amber mentioned earlier about implementation science. I mean, talk about being at the cutting edge of implementation science and supporting teachers to implement strong, equitable, evidence-based practices. You really are doing everything to be able to support students, all of the students, as developing children or adolescents, not just as data points. And it's inspiring to hear all of the work that you have done and all of the things that you want to do yet in your career. I think I can speak for everybody when I say that we all enjoyed hearing about your exemplary work, your description of how you approach your work as a problem solver. You take problems and think, well, how can I solve that? Not just sitting and admiring the problem. You really do the work of trying to solve every problem. And you're a lifelong learner. And to hear how you've advocated within your school buildings to give yourself the opportunity to implement the various roles of a school psychologist is inspiring. I'm confident that everybody here and everybody listening learned something new that they can bring with them in their own practice, whether it's how to be solution focused, whether it's how to apply research-based practices, or how to advocate for expanded roles. I think everybody has learned something new. I know I did. So on behalf of everyone here, I want to thank you for this meaningful conversation. I want to thank you for the visual or the analogy of school psych as a smartphone, and that we are more than just testers. We do more than just make those phone calls. We can do so many things, and to advocate for that is so inspiring. And thank you for all of your work with that. Dr. Pedersen, Jason, thank you. And I thank you.
Thank you. I do appreciate you all taking the time this afternoon. It was very kind of you. So thanks.